I know what people say about me now. I've seen the Facebook comments, the whispers at school pickup. They call me manipulative, vindictive, cruel. But I was in labor for 19 hours, my body shaking and my head spinning, and he wasn't there. So if I told the midwife he was volatile and unsafe, maybe I was just protecting my newborn. Maybe. That night, the delivery suite was buzzing. Nurses coming in and out, the monitors beeping, the sterile smell making my stomach turn. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for him to walk in. We'd fought that morning, but I thought he'd still come. Instead, my phone lit up with a short text. "Can't make it." I saw red, not just because of the birth, but because of everything leading up to it. The way he questioned my choices, the way he never fought me on anything, like he was just letting me take control so he could later blame me for the fallout. I wanted him to feel something for once. So when the midwife asked, "Do you want the father in the room?" I said, voice low but steady, "No. He's been aggressive." The way her face tightened told me she'd just locked a door he couldn't open. I knew that look. I'd given her permission to treat him like a threat, and she didn't need more details. She simply nodded, wrote something on her clipboard, and that was it. The truth? He'd never laid a hand on me, but in that moment, the power in my hands was like adrenaline. Every contraction hurt less than the thought of him standing there, acting like he cared. I wanted him to punish him, not with screaming or swearing, but with absence. When our daughter finally arrived, tiny and wailing, I felt both triumph and guilt tangled together. Triumph because it was my moment, mine alone. Guilt because the nurse who cut her umbilical cord gave me a look that said she had already decided who the unsafe parent was. I didn't tell him until the next morning. He called, angry, panicked. "Why didn't anyone let me in?" he demanded. I could hear the echo of a hospital corridor behind him. I said flatly, "The midwife didn't think it was a good idea. You can thank your behavior for that." He went silent. Then, "What behavior?" That pause, accusatory, heavy, made me double down. "You know exactly what I mean." I hung up before he could ask more. For the first week, he didn't see the baby. I told him the doctor recommended no visitors for her health. I made sure mutual friends accidentally heard he'd been barred from the delivery room for safety reasons. Some asked questions, most didn't. People like easy stories, and abusive dad is easier than we had a power struggle and I won. But then, about 3 weeks in, I saw him outside the house. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't pounding on the door. He was just standing there, holding a stuffed giraffe, looking like someone who had already lost. That image burned in my brain. I thought maybe it would be enough, that he'd slink away, let me raise her without interference. I was wrong. The first letter came a month later. Petition for custody hearing. My name in bold, the state seal at the top. I laughed when I opened it, thinking he didn't stand a chance. Judges favor mothers, especially when there's a safety concern on record. But as I read, my stomach sank. He was claiming defamation, parental alienation, and demanding joint custody. He'd even listed witnesses, my own friends, who would testify I'd exaggerated. I told myself he was bluffing. He had no proof. But yet I couldn't shake the thought of that stuffed giraffe sitting in the corner of the nursery where she'd never seen it. The night before our preliminary hearing, I got a message from an old mutual friend. Just so you know, he's bringing up the midwife. The midwife. My heart pounded. I assumed her notes were private, that she'd never admit I'd said what I'd said without actual evidence. But apparently in court, best interest of the child overrides everything. By the time I walked into that courthouse, the smug confidence I'd felt in the delivery room was gone. He was there already, in a pressed shirt, talking to his lawyer like he'd been preparing for this moment since that day in the hospital. And then I saw who was sitting with him. It wasn't just his lawyer. It was someone I never expected to take his side. Someone who knew exactly what I'd done. It was my sister. Not my half-sister. Not some estranged cousin I barely talked to. My full-blood, 2 years younger sister. The one who swore she wasn't picking sides when everything went down. She wouldn't look at me at first. She was sitting stiffly in the chair next to him, clutching her purse like she was afraid I might grab it. I wanted to march over and demand an explanation, but the bailiff's eyes were on me. Instead, I slid into my seat, leaned toward my lawyer, and hissed, "What the hell is she doing here?" "She's a character witness," my lawyer murmured without looking up from his notes. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My sister. My own sister. The hearing began, and it was like watching my own narrative get dismantled brick by brick. His lawyer didn't yell, didn't accuse, he just presented. Copies of text messages where I'd told mutual friends that he was barred for safety reasons. A printout of a Facebook post from my cousin parroting my words about him being unstable. And then the big one, a subpoenaed statement from the midwife, confirming I'd told her he was aggressive and that my request to bar him from the room was based solely on my word. I tried to keep my face neutral. I'd practiced it in the mirror, eyes steady, lips relaxed, no visible flinch. But when my sister was called to the stand, that mask cracked. She didn't attack me outright. That would have been easier. Instead, she answered in calm, measured sentences. Yes, she told me she didn't want him in the delivery room. Yes, she said it was because she felt he might upset her. And then the dagger. No, I never saw him act violent toward her. Ever. The judge didn't look impressed with me after that. My lawyer tried to spin it, tried to emphasize emotional distress and protective instincts, but the damage was done. The words were out there, under oath. When court recessed for lunch, I caught my sister in the hallway. You blindsided me," I snapped. She looked almost sad. "You put me in the middle the day you lied to that midwife," she said softly. "I'm not doing it again." And then she walked off with him, just like that. My sister, walking beside the man I'd once promised to spend my life with, the man I'd painted as a danger to our child. I didn't eat lunch. I sat in my car, scrolling through old photos of us together, me and her, arms around each other at Thanksgiving, laughing on some beach vacation. I tried to remind myself why I did what I did. I was protecting my daughter. That's what I kept telling myself. But a tiny voice in my head whispered, "No, you were punishing him." The afternoon session was worse. His lawyer introduced something I hadn't anticipated, a timeline of every time he'd tried to see our daughter, every visit I blocked or postponed, with complete screenshots of unanswered texts and emails. It was damning, not just because it showed I'd kept him away, but because it showed how calm he'd been. No swearing, no threats, just patient, repeated requests. And then came his testimony. He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He just described, in painful detail, how it felt to wait outside the hospital holding that giraffe, wondering if his daughter was healthy, wondering if she'd even know him. He said he'd gone home that night and sat in her empty nursery, listening to the rain,
trying to convince himself that I was just overwhelmed and that things would get better. My lawyer objected a few times. Narrative, speculation. But I could see the judge listening, really listening. By the time court adjourned for the day, I felt stripped raw. My version of the story had been center stage for months. Now it was his, and it was cleaner, calmer, and frankly, more believable. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying my sister's voice on the stand, the midwife's statement, the way he looked at me when he talked about the giraffe. There was no anger in his eyes, just something worse, pity. The next morning, I decided to change tactics. If I couldn't discredit him, maybe I could show the court that I was the more stable and consistent parent. I dressed neatly, brought every medical record, every vaccination log, every feeding chart I had. I thought maybe I could bury the lies under a mountain of responsibility. But when I walked into the courtroom, I knew instantly it wouldn't matter. Because sitting in the back row, watching intently, was someone who could blow my new model parent angle to pieces. Someone I never thought would take the stand against me. And they were on his witness list.
It was my mother. Not some distant aunt or a family friend, my own mom, the woman who used to call him the best thing that ever happened to me. She sat in the back row, posture perfect, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for Sunday Mass. When his lawyer called her name, she didn't hesitate. I could feel my stomach drop. My mother is not a subtle person. She believes in telling her truth, whether anyone wants to hear it or not. And apparently, today, her truth was going to belong to him. She was sworn in, adjusted the microphone, and looked straight at the judge, not at me. Yes, I was at the hospital the day my granddaughter was born. Yes, I saw my daughter refuse to let him in. When his lawyer asked why, she didn't sugarcoat it. Because she told the midwife he was abusive. The pause after that felt like a punch. I could see the judge's pen still for a moment, hovering over his notepad. Then came the real blow. No, my mother said clearly, I never saw him be abusive. I've seen them argue, sure, but I've never seen him hurt her or threaten her. She glanced my way just for a second, her eyes cool and unreadable. What I have seen, she added, is my daughter try to control every situation when she feels scared of losing. My chest burned. I wanted to stand up and shout that she didn't understand, that she was twisting things. But the truth was, she did understand. She'd seen it my whole life. How I'd corner people into my version of events if it meant keeping the upper hand. And now, she was handing that history to his lawyer, gift-wrapped. When she stepped down, I caught her expression as she walked past me. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, which somehow felt worse. The rest of the day blurred. I barely heard my own lawyer's questions. He kept trying to redirect to focus on the child's well-being, but every answer felt flimsy against what my mother and sister had just handed over. During the lunch break, I cornered my mom outside by the vending machines. You really think he's a better parent than me? She sighed, like I was exhausting her. I think he's not the villain you made him out to be, and I think your daughter deserves both parents in her life. You've made it nearly impossible for that to happen. I hated her in that moment. Not because she was wrong, although I refused to admit that out loud, but because she'd said it where it mattered most, on record, in front of the people who would decide my future.
That night, I went home and stared at the half-packed boxes in my living room. I had been planning to move closer to my job, use better school district as my next argument for why our daughter should stay primarily with me. But now, I wasn't sure any of my strategies were going to work. Day 3 of the hearing brought this second twist I wasn't ready for. His lawyer called an expert witness, a child psychologist. I thought it was just for show, but when she started reading from her notes, I realized she'd actually met with our daughter. She is aware that her father was not present at her birth. She has been told it was because he was unsafe. My throat tightened. She reports feeling confused because her own experiences with her father are positive. She has no memories of him being unsafe or unkind. The words were clinical, but they landed like knives. My lawyer objected, tried to frame it as coaching from his side, but the psychologist shut it down calmly. Children know when there's a gap between what they're told and what they see. That gap can cause long-term trust issues. The judge leaned forward slightly, scribbling something. By the time the psychologist was done, I could feel the walls closing in. My version of reality, so carefully crafted, was unraveling, and I couldn't patch it fast enough. During a recess, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my boss, a text from my landlord about the rent increase, and a message from a mutual friend. He's talking to a realtor. Looks like he's buying a place. It shouldn't have mattered, but the thought of him setting up some picture-perfect home, maybe even a room for her, better than mine, made me feel physically ill. That afternoon, my lawyer tried to call me to the stand, to humanize me, to show I wasn't some manipulative ice queen. But before I could even settle into the chair, his lawyer dropped something on the table with a quiet, deliberate motion. A thick, spiral-bound printout. It was a full transcript of my private Facebook messages from the past year. And I knew, without opening it, that there were things in there I never wanted read aloud in a courtroom.
The first line his lawyer read was enough to drain every ounce of blood from my face. And if he thinks he's getting her without crawling back to me first, he's delusional. It was a message I'd sent to a friend months ago, back when I thought my private venting would stay exactly that, private. The lawyer's voice was calm, almost polite, but the words hit like gunfire in the quiet courtroom. I felt my cheeks burn as he flipped to the next page. I'll make him regret missing the birth for the rest of his life. Another gem, another carefully worded threat, dressed up as righteous indignation. My lawyer objected, muttering about context, but the damage was already done. The judge wasn't even looking at me anymore. He was scribbling something that I knew, deep down, wouldn't help my case. Then came the worst one. I don't care if she cries for him. She'll get over it. I'm her mother, and I decide what's best. Even I had trouble swallowing that one. Hearing my own words read back to me in that cold, stripped-down tone made me sound monstrous. I stared straight ahead, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, especially not his. I could feel him watching me, though, not smug, not triumphant, just quiet. And that quiet was somehow worse. When court adjourned for the day, I grabbed my bag and practically ran out of there. The hallway felt like a tunnel closing in on me. My phone buzzed in my hand, more missed calls from work. I ignored them. I couldn't think about my job, not when my entire life was collapsing in slow motion. Outside,
He was leaning against the brick wall talking to his lawyer. Our eyes met for half a second, and in that moment, I remembered the day I first told him I was pregnant. How he'd looked at me like I'd just handed him the entire universe, and how quickly I'd started deciding which parts of that universe he'd be allowed to keep. I didn't stop walking. At home, I poured a glass of wine and sat in the dark. The Facebook messages weren't the worst things I'd said, but they were the worst things he could prove. The rest, my tone, my little digs during exchanges, the way I forgot to tell him about school events, those were invisible. And now, after today, they didn't need to be visible. People would believe them anyway. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my sister. He's posting pictures with her. I didn't even need to ask who her was. The family friend. The one who'd been at every barbecue, every holiday gathering, always smiling, always just helping out. The same woman I'd accused, half-jokingly back then, of flirting with him. And now there they were, in front of some cute little craftsman house, holding a "sold" sign. She had her arm around him. He had our daughter on his shoulders. I couldn't breathe. By the time I walked into court, I was vibrating. My lawyer told me to stay calm, but I couldn't. Not when I knew she'd probably be sitting in the gallery, watching. Sure enough, halfway through the morning session, I saw her slip in and take a seat in the back. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the weight of her presence, like she was the inevitable ending to a story I hadn't realized I'd been writing. That day's testimony wasn't about character. It was about logistics. School schedules, housing stability, financial capacity. On paper, I should have had the upper hand. My job paid better. My apartment was in a better district, at least for now. But then his lawyer asked the question I'd been dreading. Are you aware my client has purchased a permanent home with a dedicated bedroom for the child? I froze. Because yes, I was aware. And yes, it looked exactly like the kind of stable, Pinterest, perfect setup judges love to see. My lawyer tried to spin it. Temporary infatuation, new relationship high, nothing proven. But the judge actually smiled when the realtor photos were submitted. Smiled. When court adjourned, I sat in my car for an hour, just gripping the steering wheel. I could see them leaving together, my daughter skipping between them, holding both their hands. She looked happy, unbothered, like she didn't even remember the story I'd built about him being dangerous. That night, I opened a blank email to my lawyer, ready to suggest a settlement, something that would keep her with me most of the time, just so I wouldn't lose completely. But before I could type, another notification popped up, an official email from the court clerk. It was the judge's notice. The final day of testimony had been moved up. And the very first witness on the revised list was her, the family friend.
I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the bailiff called her name and my lungs forgot how to work. She walked in like she belonged there. Hair-pinned, navy blazer, that calm PTA president smile she uses when telling people the bake sale is by donation but suggested minimum is 10. She'd held my baby at 3 days old. She'd brought casseroles and laundry detergent. She'd taken pictures of me on the couch with the newborn when my face was still swollen, and I swore I'd never let anyone see them. Family friend, yes. But more than that. She'd been there for every barbecue, every birthday, every let me help while he runs to the store. I used to joke she was our third parent. Apparently, the joke landed. She swore in, palm steady. Didn't look at me. His lawyer started soft. How long have you known the parties? 7 years, she said. Our kids have had play dates. We have done holidays together. Did you observe their relationship during the pregnancy? Yes. And after the birth?
A beat. She didn't let him in. The room adjusted to those words like a chair scraping the floor. I stared at the back of her blazer, willing her to turn around. She didn't. "What did she tell you?" his lawyer asked. "She said the midwife had restricted him because he was unsafe." Her voice didn't shake. I asked if she was okay. She said, "Oh, I made sure he stayed out. He doesn't get to show up just for the photo." I felt heat crawl up my neck. My lawyer stood. "Objection, hearsay." "Solely for state of mind," his lawyer replied, already half turned to the judge like he knew the ruling. "Overruled," the judge said, dry as paper. His lawyer moved closer. "Did she ever describe any physical abuse?" "No." "Any threats?" "No." "What did she describe?" The friend exhaled. It fogged the mic for a second. "Control." She wanted to control the moment. A pause I hated. She said if he wanted to be the hero, he should have been the hero for 9 months. My chair felt suddenly wrong, like I was sitting on the edge of a step I couldn't see. This was not the script we'd practiced. In my head, she was supposed to be neutral, measured, harmless. Not this. His lawyer slid a plastic sleeve across the ledge. "Your Honor, marked Exhibit Q." A text thread between the witness and mother on the day of the delivery. My lawyer leaned in, scanning. I knew the bubble colors before I even saw the words, my midnight blue paragraphs long and breathless, her short gray responses. He read, "If he sets foot in this room, I swear I'm walking." Another, "She'll know who showed up for her. It won't be him." My lawyer objected, on context, on timing, on heat of the moment. The judge let it in. The courtroom air got heavy again. I flashed to that hospital room like a needle dropping back into a groove, how the fluorescent lights whined, how the midwife's pen scratched like an insect, how power felt like oxygen finally. I had been terrified. I had been furious. I had believed, truly, that the story needed a villain and it couldn't be me. His lawyer wasn't done. "Did she ever ask you to communicate anything to the midwife?" Silence. The friend shifted her weight. I gripped the edge of the table. "Yes," she said finally. "She asked if I could talk to the nurse at the desk and say the situation at home was tense, so they'd keep him in the hallway." The carpet might as well have fallen away. I could hear my pulse in my ears, thick, oceanic. My lawyer stood so fast his chair squealed. "Objection! This is character assassination. There's no proof." "There is," she said quietly, and I knew that tone. "It's the one she uses when she pulls an extra glue stick out of her bag at craft time. Inevitable, unhurried, already ready." She opened her tote, took out a slim silver recorder I recognized from her podcast hobby, and set it on the ledge. "I record notes for work," she said to the judge. "Not to me. On the day of the birth, I left a voice memo while I was in the hallway to remember what she wanted me to say. It captured more than I realized." The room tipped. I grabbed water I didn't want and swallowed air. My lawyer whispered, "We'll challenge foundation," but his voice sounded like it was coming through drywall. Chain of custody, authenticity, blah, blah, blah. His lawyer was already there with a neat little affidavit. The judge took the device, the bailiff plugged it in. A hollow, hallway humming audio filled the room, metallic and too intimate. First, footsteps. Then my voice, smaller than I remember, tight with pain and something meaner. "Tell them he gets angry, not dangerous. Just say escalates. Say he escalates me." They listened to that word. My lawyer's hand landed on my forearm under the table. I didn't move. On the recording, the friend murmured, "You're sure?" And my voice, God, my voice, answered, "He missed everything. He doesn't get to take this, too. If they ask, just say I'm not safe with him right now." The audio clicked softly and ended. No dramatic music, no courtroom gasp, just this manageable, awful quiet. The judge looked up slowly, wrote something, wrote more. I felt like laughing or crying or ripping the microphone out and screaming that nobody remembered what it was like to sit there alone for months, to choose baby names by yourself, to feel kicks with no one's hand on your stomach, and then have him text, "Can't make it." I wanted to tell them I had been drowning and control was the only float I had. Instead, I looked down at my lap and noticed the way my hands were clasped so hard my knuckles were white. Good mom hands. Responsible hands. Hands that make lists and cut grapes in halves and label bins. And also hands that typed, "I'll make him regret it," and sent it like a match into a dry field. Cross-examination was all sandpaper and splinters. My lawyer tried to peel back context. He asked the friend, "You've been close with father, haven't you?" "Yes." She didn't flinch. "Romantically?" A frown. "Not until after the separation." "And before that?" She considered. "He was my friend. He is my friend." She looked at me then, finally, "And he's a good father." The judge didn't reenact. Judges don't. But his pen stopped moving. By the afternoon, my mouth tasted like pennies. I texted my boss a fake dentist emergency and turned off my phone. I couldn't switch between courtroom and real life anymore. They'd fused into one fluorescent nightmare. When we broke for the day, I ended up alone in the bathroom, forehead against the cold metal of the paper towel dispenser, breath fogging the chrome. My sister walked in, paused, walked out again. Even pity avoided me. Back in the hallway, I saw him kneel and zip our daughter's coat. She held the stuffed giraffe, the same one from the night he waited outside and babbled about stickers. He smiled at her with this open, quiet face that made me want to smash something and crawl into his jacket at the same time. My lawyer caught up. "We can still argue primary with a robust visitation plan for him. We lean hard on continuity of care, medical appointments, daycare records. We paint the recording as postpartum distress, not malice." I nodded like a puppet. Continuity, records, paint. The bailiff called us back for a brief scheduling conference. We filed in. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced at the calendar, then at us. "Given today's exhibits, I'm considering a temporary order to stabilize the child's routine, pending final ruling." I felt a small, hysterical laugh tickle my throat. "Routine. Stabilize. Fine. Stabilize me while you're at it." "The child," the judge continued, "spend the next 2 weeks." He looked directly at me. "With father." And then he added a condition I didn't hear at first because my ears were roaring, because my mouth had gone numb, because everything narrowed to a pinpoint. "And there will be a home visit tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. A pause. Papers shuffled. Someone coughed. "With the guardian ad litem and Child Protective Services."
I didn't sleep the night before the home visit. Not because I thought they'd find anything dangerous. My apartment was fine, cleaner than fine, sparkling even. I stayed up because every drawer I opened felt like a test. Every photo on the fridge felt like evidence. At 2 a.m., I was reorganizing the pantry like it was the bar exam. Cereal front-facing, expiry dates turned out, baby snacks lined in precise rows. At 3 a.m., I was wiping down the baseboards, muttering to myself about continuity of care like it was a prayer. By 7:30, my hair was braided, my makeup was mom-light, concealer, mascara, no lipstick. I wanted to look warm, approachable, but also like I had my life together. I had laid out her little pink dress and matching bow on the couch, because when they saw her, they'd see a child loved and cared for. At 7:59, there was a knock. The guardian ad litem, a woman in a gray cardigan and no-nonsense glasses, stepped in first. CPS followed, a man in a dark jacket with a clipboard. They moved like people who had been in 1,000 houses, 1,000 kitchens. The cardigan woman smiled politely. The man didn't. "Can we start with the child's room?" she asked. I led them in, heartbeat in my throat. The crib was made, the rocking chair in the corner, books stacked neatly on the low shelf. The cardigan woman nodded approvingly. The CPS guy checked the window locks, opened the closet, took notes. "Routine?" he asked without looking at me. She's in daycare 3 days a week. We do bath time every night. Stories, lights out by 8. She knows her colors. She's starting to count. He wrote something without reacting. Then we moved to the kitchen, and that's when my stomach dropped. On the counter, next to the coffee maker, sat a plastic pharmacy bottle. Not mine. His. The label faced out. His name, his prescription, his dosage. It must have been from the diaper bag swap 2 weeks ago, when she stayed at his place and he dropped off her things without coming in. I'd shoved the bag in the pantry and forgotten. The cardigan woman noticed immediately. "Is this medication prescribed to you?" No, it's his," I said quickly. "He must have left it." The CPS guy's pen didn't pause. "Why is it in your kitchen?" "I didn't even realize it was there. It's not, look, it's childproof. She couldn't." The cardigan woman picked it up, read the instructions, set it down deliberately. "We'll note it," she said, and her voice was gentle in a way that made my skin crawl. From there, I couldn't stop hearing my own voice in my head. They'll twist this. They'll turn this into neglect. We sat at the dining table for questions. The cardigan woman asked, "Describe your co-parenting relationship." I answered, It's complicated. I do most of the work. He shows up for the fun stuff, playgrounds, birthday parties, but not the appointments, the fevers at 3 a.m., The CPS guy interrupted. "Father's records show he's attended the last 3 pediatric visits." My throat tightened. "Because I told him the times," I snapped. "Before I didn't. That's not the same as him caring." They exchanged a look, wrote more notes. Then the cardigan woman asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why did you keep him out of the delivery room?" I gave the answer I'd rehearsed. I wasn't comfortable. The pregnancy had been stressful. I didn't feel safe having him there. She tilted her head. "Not safe how?" "Emotionally," I said quickly. "It wasn't about physical safety." The CPS guy's pen scratched something hard. "But you told the midwife he was unsafe?" The room felt suddenly too small. "I didn't say dangerous," I said, hearing my own courtroom voice, the one that tried to sound rational while my chest tightened. They didn't react. They never do. That's the worst part. They just write, and you don't know which words will be your undoing. When they left, I stood at the door long after it shut, my fingers pressed to the wood like I could hold it closed against what was coming. At 1:13 p.m., my lawyer called. The temporary order's filed. They're keeping her with him until the hearing. I gripped the counter so hard my palm hurt. For how long? 2 weeks, maybe longer if they want a full evaluation. I thought of her stuffed giraffe, of the way she twists its ear when she's tired, of her morning babble, her little hand tapping my arm to wake me. 2 weeks felt like a season, like a lifetime. By the 3rd night, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I drove past his house. It was stupid, I know, but I needed to see, needed to prove to myself she missed me as much as I missed her. The lights were on, curtains open in the living room, and there she was, on the rug, in pajamas I didn't recognize, hair damp from a bath. He was there too, of course, but so was someone else, the family friend. She was sitting cross-legged on the rug, painting my daughter's tiny toenails, laughing with her, like it was the most normal thing in the world. And my daughter, my baby, looked up at her with this open, unguarded smile I hadn't seen in weeks, the kind she used to give me. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands hurt, because in that one stupid, ordinary moment, I realized they didn't just take her from my house. They were building her a new home. The next morning, I woke up with the image still burned into my head. Her sitting on that rug, the family friend painting her nails like she'd always belonged there. I didn't even remember falling asleep. Just the jolt of waking up with my phone in my hand, half-typed messages still glowing on the screen. All night, my brain kept spinning between 2 options. Storm in and remind them whose child she is, or play it cool until court. I knew which one my lawyer would choose. I also knew which one I wanted to choose. By 9 a.m., I was parked outside the courthouse, papers clutched in my hand, in emergency motion for a custody review. I hadn't told my lawyer. I thought if I could just get in front of a judge, explain how inappropriate it was for him to be letting her around my daughters so soon, someone would see reason. But when I walked into the clerk's office, the woman behind the glass didn't even blink. "That's not an emergency," she said flatly. "Your hearing is still set for next Thursday." "It is an emergency," I snapped. "She's being confused, manipulated. That woman—" The clerk cut me off. "Ma'am, if you feel there's endangerment, you can call CPS. Otherwise, you'll have to wait for your date." Wait. Like I hadn't been waiting every damn day since they took her. Like my daughter was some package on a delayed delivery. I walked out, my pulse pounding in my ears, straight into him. He was holding her, my little girl, bundled in a jacket, her hair in two perfect pigtails. She had a lunchbox in her hand and that sleepy morning face that used to be mine to see first. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, crouching down. She looked at me startled. Then she smiled, but not the way she used to. It was small, polite, almost shy. "We're late for daycare," he said, shifting her in his arms. His voice was calm, too calm. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stood, my hand shaking. "You can't just... She's my daughter too." He looked me dead in the eye, then start acting like it. Before I could respond, the family friend appeared from behind him, holding his coffee. "We really have to go," she said, like she had any right to we. They walked away together, him, her, and my child, toward his truck. My daughter glanced back once, then turned her face toward the family friend, laughing at something she said. That laugh felt like a knife. By the time Thursday came, I was ready for war. I wore my most tailored blazer, my hair perfectly straight, every document neatly tabbed. My lawyer told me to stay composed, but the second we sat down in that courtroom, I knew composure wouldn't save me. He had pictures. Not grainy, not sneaky, perfectly lit, date-stamped photos of his house, her room there, the meals he'd made, the art projects they'd done. And in more than half of them, the family friend was right there smiling with my daughter like she'd been part of the picture all along. "She's been a consistent caregiver," his lawyer said. "Our client's daughter is thriving in this stable environment." I objected, my lawyer said. "This individual is not a legal guardian." The judge held up a hand. "I'm interested in the welfare of the child, not labels. From what I see here, she appears happy and well cared for." Happy, well cared for. Words that were supposed to describe me. When it was my turn, I tried to explain about the midwife, about why I told her what I told her, about needing space in the delivery room, about feeling like he'd crowd me out. But the judge's face didn't soften. Then came the kicker. His lawyer slid a piece of paper across the table. A signed statement from the midwife. She'd been subpoenaed. She wrote that I had implied the father was unsafe without giving any concrete examples, and that in her professional opinion, my wording led staff to believe there was a risk to the mother or child. My stomach dropped. That single page stripped the varnish off every careful excuse I'd built. The judge took a long pause, then spoke in that maddeningly calm way judges do when they're about to destroy your life.
Given the testimony, the stability shown in the father's home, and the need to minimize disruption for the child, I'm awarding primary custody to the father. Mother will have visitation every other weekend. Every other weekend. The gavel sounded like it came from underwater. My lawyer was saying something. We can appeal, but it was just static in my head. We walked out of the courtroom, and there they were. Him, the family friend, and my daughter holding both their hands like they were hers. She didn't even see me at first. When she did, she waved. A small, sweet wave, like to a neighbor she barely knew. And then the family friend crouched down, whispered something in her ear, and my daughter's smile widened. I stood frozen, my bag slipping from my shoulder, because in that instant, I realized they weren't just replacing me in her daily life. They were erasing me from her memories. And I didn't know if there was any way to stop it. The end, or maybe just the real beginning.